Hello and welcome to AXSchat. We're delighted to have Kate Nash joining us today. Kate is the CEO of Purple Space, which is the network of employee networks on disability. I'm very pleased to say that I've done some work with Kate and as Atos, we're members of Purple Space, so it's really good to have you here, Kate. Can you tell us a little bit about what got you started working in the field of disability inclusion, and then particularly what drove you to work in the space of employee networks, because it's a particularly interesting area?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, hi guys, and hi to everyone who may be watching. Really pleased to join you, and warm thanks for the introduction. I hear so much, and of course we see the fabulous work. So it's just fantastic to be with you. In terms of why and how I got involved, well, there's that lovely expression, the personal is political. It was ever thus for me. I feel 100, but I'm not. Apparently, I'm just over 50 years old, and I acquired my own disability, my own health condition when I was mid-teens. I was 15, and I developed juvenile chronic arthritis, a type of juvenile arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis. And it was a very dramatic onset. I went from being a teenager running around a hockey pitch, a youngster who couldn't walk, who was then a permanent wheelchair user. I couldn't wash myself, I couldn't feed myself. Going to school was really a great struggle, a great challenge. And I suppose for me, just the world changed, and how different people would react to me, and started to think differently about my life's journey and the things that I could legitimately expect to get out of life. And I noticed that unless I arrested that and thought differently about myself, those thoughts and feelings, what I now call the soft bigotry of low expectation, was going to have a deleterious impact on how I felt about myself and what was possible for me in life. So I won't give you the whole story, but that informed my journey. It informed my journey, and I knew at a very young age I wanted to be helpful in making it easier for people to feel differently and more positive and supportive about disabled talent, what I now call purple talent. So, my mid-career, I'm known for the work I do in Westminster, in the Houses of Parliament here in the UK. I'm a trained lobbyist, so I've supported the process of legislative reform here in the UK. And I suppose, Neil, to fast forward, for me, I worked very quickly with employers' community, and I saw a huge appetite to drive cultural change. And I was intrigued and interested in the establishment of women's network. So in the UK in the mid-70s, we had the Sex Discrimination Act and the Race Relations Act, and it was after those legislations that we started to see people networks. And I predicted that as we saw the 95 Act here in the UK, we'd start to see the growth of employee networks. So that's really how I got going now.
That's I love the personal part of your story, Kate, and I know that looking at this from the lens of the United States, which is always interesting, we have had some successes with people groups, employee resource groups, but we've also had some real failures, and I was just wondering if you could speak to it. And so let me ground that a little bit. I know, for example, that we corporations in the United States have really encouraged employee resource groups or people's groups, or there's multiple names for it, as you know, since you're such an expert in this space. But I've had corporate clients that have created these programs, but they don't really give funding to the programs. There's no real authority, there's no resources. And so the programs sometimes backfire, and it feels that the employees actually start feeling disenfranchised. So instead of creating something that's powerful and allows us to come together to share some of the things that were more alike about us, then our differences. It's actually some cases. And I'm just wondering if you've seen that in the work that you do, and if you have any advice for the corporations in the United States that want to do this and want to make sure employees have a voice, but actually aren't having successes with this.
Yeah, no, I absolutely recognise your reflections there, Deborah. And I think it was one of the reasons why I chose to want to be helpful in the establishment of employee networks or resource groups, affinity groups, special interest groups. As you say, they're all called something slightly different. And I think what I've noticed is, I mean, there's two things going on. One is if you don't adequately fund or invest in your network, you can't really expect that grouping of individuals to provide a helpful and to be I suppose a stakeholder group in how a business chooses to inform cultural change. So, our advice is always you need to invest in your network. It doesn't have to be huge volumes of cash. I mean, obviously budget helps. So whether a network or a resource group has a defined budget, or they're able to draw down resources from the business, they need to have a little bit of nurturing and a little bit of from the business. And to get a disability champion, they need to be well connected with the business, etc. But I think coming back to, I suppose, a broader point, Deborah. I mean, when we started, Purple Space as an entity has only been around for 18 months, but we started that work 10 years ago in Kate Nash Associates, where we started to work with businesses to set up networks. But the common theme that ran through the narrative around disability networks is sometimes how really hard it is for us to bring our authentic selves to work, and how hard it is for us to own a human experience that, if pushed, the vast majority of people would prefer not to experience. And, although there's so many common themes that run through people of difference, so, if you compare and contrast the issues of disabled people, women, BME, LGBT, there are lots of themes, but one of the things that is different is that we struggle to own an identity and experience that's really hard. It's really hard. And that, to answer your question, plays out, I think, in then how a company, the people it has.
Good answer. Neil, I think you had a comment.
Yeah, I do. So I'm very interested to sort of follow up on the investment piece, and you said that it doesn't require huge amounts of investment, and I can testify that you can do quite a lot on a shoestring. But and you alluded to champions, but one area that I think is really important, and I'd love to get your take on, is sponsorship. So, how important do you feel the executive sponsorship is to the success of these networks, and not just the naming, but the actual involvement of executives in actually making sure that it's a success? Because I feel that it's more important than the money sometimes for organizations to see the people at the top being active and engaged and supportive than the giving of a small amount of funding. But you work with lots of networks, and so perhaps you can tell me what works.
Yeah, absolutely support your observation there, Neil. It's absolutely critical for any network, in order for it to be really successful and to start to develop what we call disability confidence from the inside out, to be noticed and to be championed and to be promoted and to have doors opened for the network by senior business leaders. So, we often talk about the tennis match between the network and the senior team. It needs to be a flow, there needs to be a conversation, there needs to be an understanding, I suppose, from the disability champions or disability allies or disability sponsors. Again, the language is the globe. But about the barriers that individuals face and what they can do to open doors where hitherto those doors have remained closed. So yeah, you know, budget is important, but it's only part of the picture. It's making sure that you've got a good understanding about what needs to be done, the conversation, and who can open the doors to create and drive change.
Okay, I usually move between two countries, Ireland and Portugal. And more 2 years ago, you have written a book called Secrets and Big News that talks about enabling people themselves at work. And what I feel in my side of the world is sometimes when we bring the topic of networks and uh, offering the possibility of disabled employees to be part of the workforce, HR professionals, they are very uncomfortable with discussing the topic. And sometimes I've been in a few presentations, and at the end of the PowerPoint, there's a line there about diversity that is just there because, you know, at least it's there. Just it was mentioned, but it doesn't really have a real meaning. So, what do you think it's, you know, that we still need to do to bring these important professionals to this type of conversation? Because sometimes they are a bit of gatekeepers and they have a very important role in all these aspects.
Yeah. Oh, I have so many different ways I could answer that question, Antonio. We are here, aren't we, across the world several times. Let me see what I can do to answer your question. I think one of our observations, and you mentioned Secret and Big News, which, and it's funny, I've got a copy with me. Look, here's one we made earlier. But yes, you've noticed that was the book, a wave of conversations and a demand for us to develop this portal, this elegant, cost-effective way of bringing the network leaders. And what was happening is I suppose disabled employees generating their own conversation. So for a very long time, I think for different reasons, the agenda for disabled people has been accepted somewhat passively by ourselves as individuals. So we've regrettably, I think, enabled a situation or encouraged a situation, or by default, we have lived within a situation where the conversation plays out in what I would call the macro level. So it's about policies, it's about practices, it's about procedures, it's about things that others can do to either enable us to bring our brilliant selves to work for the business or to frustrate that process. And, you know, inadvertently, I think we, and I own that, I think we as individuals, because often we are grappling with difficult things, is to not get into the conversation, not to be about that. And I think what Secrets did, which was, and we'll provide the link, we'll make sure that your audiences are familiar with some of the key messages. But one of the things that came out of that is we need to do a better job of bringing our authentic selves to work. We need to get better at sharing our own stories of difference. We need to recognise sometimes how the soft bigotry of low expectation has a massive impact on us as individuals, and therefore we sometimes inadvertently screen ourselves out of opportunities. A wonderful book, The Provocation, that was written by, say, Sheryl Sandberg, the CEO of Facebook, and, you know, very controversial book. Not everybody loved it. Some loved it, some loved it less. And we simply chose to notice that while Sheryl didn't shy away, that there are still institutional barriers that get in the way of women leaning into their career. There are also some behaviours that sometimes we regrettably play out that don't help us. And that's what we wanted to do with Secrets. We'd opened up a different conversation, a provocation to ourselves to get into this debate. And so coming back to your question, Antonio, yeah, there is still a lot to be done up here, but we just can't leave that to other great people you know, we have to recognize that we have skin in the game, notice the things that we can do differently and better. We're not going to be able to improve that tennis match, you know, that ping pong about what the business can do and then what we can do. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I think Deborah, you want to comment?
Yes, but before I do, I think Neil wants to interject real quick.
Yeah, so I'm very interested in the whole sort of idea of allies, and you've mentioned them, and I think it's but also you're talking about the sort of soft bigotry element as well. And here I'm showing my dyslexia because I had the idea in my head and now I'm bluffing because I couldn't remember what it was because my short-term memory is like that of a goldfish. And what it was actually about was more around letting Deborah speak while I remember.
I was going to say old age, but you're just such a youngster, so it can't be old age.
Well, I've had my ears lowered today, so I look younger.
So I will make my comment questions while he gets that back because it happens to me all the time. But Kate, I know here I started off really the conversation in almost a little bit of a negative way, in that talking about the problems we have with ERGs, employee groups and people groups. And I know in my beautiful country, I love my country so much, but as anybody that listens to the program knows, you know, I openly admit perfect over here on the side of the pond yet. But one thing I think sometimes that gets in the way of the ERG groups that corporations in the United States try to do is some of the compliance issues, the litigation, the legislation, all that rolling around. And I actually really believe that the United Kingdom has done a better job in disability inclusion in a lot of ways than the U.S. employers. And I'm not insulting the U.S. employers because I just think that there's been amazing change that has happened because of the United States. And so, but I see often just such confusion with the people type groups, the employee groups. And interested in hearing you talk a little bit about, Kate, was give us an example of, I mean, you don't have to name the brand unless you want to, but talk a little bit about how some of the corporations that have worked with your group in the United Kingdom have actually been successful because they have included a well-working ERG group in their corporation.
Yeah, surely. And I think, I mean, we obviously have many examples, and you know, we're close to our members, so I feel able to share some anecdotes about some of the things that they share, that story themselves, they share their collateral, etc. But a big, primarily UK retail bank, Barclays Bank, for example, has a very mature network, the Reach network, where, you know, year on year you see significant growth in terms of how they engage with their disabled employees, well supported by great champions, purple allies. And one of the, I think, really well thought through campaigns that they created was the This Is Me campaign. I don't know whether you focused it on your AXSchat, but basically it's a campaign to support individuals to share their story of their mental health challenges. Creative campaign, but a very imaginative campaign where through videos and posters and photographic imagery, you'd have the story of someone who says, I'm making X for the business, I travel the world, I am a parent of 3 children, I make, I deliver well for the business, and by the way, I have bipolar. It's a deliberate and very well constructed campaign to help people to share their story of disability. Through that campaign, they've invested heavily in their own disabled employees, helped them to share their story and tell their story for both personal and business gain. And then what they've done is just create this virtuous circle where, as people feel more able to share their story of difference, the more likely it is they're able to grow the network and then support the business to do differently and better at the macro level. So
Great.
yeah, lots of examples.
Yeah, that's a great example. We love Barclays. We're big fans of them because they just keep setting the bar so high. So we do brag about them, but it's because they're doing a good job. Go ahead, Neil.
Yeah, I've remembered what it was that I was going to ask, but luckily it ties into what you just said, Kate, and that is, and we do remember the we're well aware of the campaign. I think it really it's interesting to look at how people mask. People are constantly masking their disability. Even people with obvious disabilities have always had a habit of playing down their disabilities. And I guess the change that you're trying to bring about is actually bringing people to be comfortable talking about that and being successful. And I'm happily talking about it. Deborah and Antonio are. It's a frequent topic for us on AXSchat, but I still think it's something that a lot of people don't feel comfortable with. So campaigns like that are really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? I mean, we talk about protected characteristics, and, in terms of our legislation here in the UK, and it's a concept, well known across the globe. But I think for people of difference when it comes to disability and ill health, we do struggle to feel good about embracing this aspect of our identity. And for many, not all, but for a good number of individuals, they will acquire their disability while at work. So the majority, certainly in the developed world, the majority of people, 86% broadly, of all disabled people in different countries will be those individuals who have acquired their health condition or disability at work. Of course, we're struggling to make sense of this human experience. Sometimes it impacts on how we do things. So we have to learn about doing things differently, communicating differently, or walking differently, or traveling differently, or thinking. And we're having to grapple with that as well as delivering the day job. And for that and many, many, many other complex reasons about how we, regrettably as people, we think differently about people who bring difference to the table. But, it's one of the most challenging things that we're facing in mankind is our ability as human beings to anticipate human difference, to accommodate human difference, to celebrate. And disability is one of the most profoundly difficult human experiences to feel good about. But I think the way forward is through networks. It's about sharing our stories. It's about recognizing that, if I'm sitting in a conversation with someone with polio or a hearing impairment or dyslexia or a shotgun wound to the left leg, I very possibly have a lot more in common with them than I do with my, class sister who doesn't have a disability. And it's quite a provocation, but I think there's a truth in that. So the networks provide a vehicle, conversations about feeling good about yourself. What was the question?
Well, I think it's such a powerful point that you made, because last night in the United States we had our Academy Awards, and last year at our Academy Awards there was quite a bit of controversy because the people that were nominated and selected, they all had very fair skin like myself. And so the African Americans in the United States were, really felt snubbed. And so I saw a press release from a disability organization in the United States saying someone with a disability was, nominated or mentioned, even though there were multiple films that were mentioned that had themes, and that one that had themes that included disabilities. And I find it's a slippery slope, because I think there's a danger in saying every time we give an award, we've got to make sure that we are giving speaking from the U.S. lens, we have to make sure that people of color, LGBT, people with disabilities, we start going to all the diversity groups. And then it becomes, this complicates things. So is it that we are awarding the best film, global films all over the world? Are we, so it becomes a very complicated conversation. And on my radio program, Human Potential at Work, I'm often talking about, you know, the sums of the whole, because the reality is Neil mentioned, I really struggle with depression. And I was talking to my husband the other day, and it's almost like there's this little thing that walks with me a lot. And so, and it clouds my thinking sometimes, and I have to stop, and I have to use different techniques to say, okay, it's always worse in the winter. So, and also I have, you know, some ADHD going on, but a multi-dimensional person that have a lot of different attributes. And I was talking to a very successful man the other day, very, very successful man. And he is one of the most talented financial wealth management people I've ever met in the world. He's brilliant. He also happens to be a gentleman that's quadriplegic. He got in a really bad car accident, and he became a quadriplegic. And so he has all kind of opportunities in his life to walk past it. And often people will greet him, and the first thing they see is that wheelchair. That's all they see is the wheelchair. And they don't see that this man is very financially successful. He's very, very brilliant when it comes to finances. And so he doesn't like to talk about disabilities because he feels like that's all people see when they see him anyway. So he wants to talk about more of the entire person he is. And so it's a very complicated topic, which is why I know you're saying that with the purple space, if we don't have these conversations, how can we grow as societies, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Deborah. It's a lovely story. You know, one of the campaigns here in the UK that a not-for-profit, a disability charity, Scope, very well, very successfully, is a concept called End the Awkward, which is primarily for champions and line managers, non-disabled people in businesses who want to do well by their people and want to understand some of the things that they need to do differently to end their level of awkwardness. But I think for Purple Space, though that's helpful, you know, it only goes so far, because we too have to notice those things that we need to do, our behaviours that either start the right conversations or indeed close down those that are not helpful. An example, I mean, I'm waving my arms around here. I use my arms and my hands a lot. But if you were to focus in on my hands are very different. You know, you can see visibly that I have significant rheumatoid arthritis in my hands, and they looked that way when I was 15. And I remember when I was organising an international youth congress for young people with arthritis across the world. So I would have been about 23, 24. I remember seeing these fantastic people rock up, youngsters. It was the Scandinavians, it was the Norwegians, it was the Swedes, it was the folk from the Netherlands, and I remember looking at my sisters from other countries, and they wore beautiful diamond rings, and they had painted their nails. And in the evening, and I have a point to this story, I remember them saying, you know, if you've got it, flaunt it, and if you've not got it, flaunt it anyway. And I think it's just noticing the things sometimes that we do. I mean, now I wear rings and paint my nails. And I think my point being, now, if I'm in a conversation with a non-disabled line manager who means well, but asks me if I've ever tried copper bracelets to get rid of my arthritis, go with that. How do I demonstrate that I am a successful businesswoman in my own right? And instead of having a long conversation that's going to get nowhere fast, I choose to say, no, I haven't tried copper, but I love silver. And I close it down and I move on. So us teaching ourselves the things that we can do to close down what I would call the awkward questions, where they have no place in the workplace. So to own your story, open it up, close it down, and to feel proficient in those, because sometimes you have to open it up. Sometimes at a promotion interview and you're asked an awkward question, whether it's legal or illegal, you have an opportunity,
right,
proficiently, so that you quell the fears that may be sitting behind their mind's eye. But it's complex, and of course it takes an old woman like me, like, I was going to say like all of us, but of course you're very young people, said before I take a it's a long time, and I think the networks, what they're able to do is to help people fast forward and have those conversations and notice those things more quickly, so that they can do something about it, retain their career.
Kate, you having seen that you as an organize a good number of networking events, and where you have professionals from different areas, different backgrounds. Now, one of the challenges that we have today in business and world is looking for talent people, innovative. To be able to create products that can serve us in the way how we live. We see every day new technologies coming, Internet of Things, virtual reality. If you go to Twitter, we see all these trends all over the place. So what do you think it will be is the role of these networks in helping new talent to drive?
Yeah. Well, it's one of the things I'm awestruck about in terms of the AXSchat is the role and the contribution you have made across the world to us thinking differently and better about the use of technology and the role that plays in terms of driving change. In terms of some companies won't have networks. They may be too small, particularly the SME sector. Or it may be a culture that doesn't gravitate to the notion of networks or resource groups. But we talk, and we always encourage businesses, particularly those that are developing products and services to drive change, and where they're selling products to the general public, etc. We talk a lot about learning directly from your people. And so even if it's not a network, whether it's a listening group, or whether it's having good and consistent methods in new products that are coming to market, whether it's using, not all employees will want to be used as kind of what I would call test fodder in the system. A good number will. So, certainly the user groups, the IT user groups, for example, are a great, quite specific network of individuals that will support the business to test new products and new services and new IT applications, etc. So really an important thing to do, I think, is for a business to turn to its own folk, to identify talent, as you say, Antonio, and then ask that talent to support the business to develop products and services.
Thank you, Kate. Look, today there's an event in Barcelona, the Mobile World Congress, and quite often we see events like this holding panels, conversations, not only about technology but about smart cities, and very rarely we see someone talking about accessibility and the needs of citizens with disabilities. There's a very conversation focused on technology instead of sometimes starting from the perspective of the citizen that we are supposed to serve.
Yes, absolutely. And I know we're close to the end, but yes, you just have to invite me back to answer that question. You're right. Sometimes we do big global conferences that are talking about product and not noticing, of course, the products are really designed for people. And if you get it right on the access front, then you're more likely to be able to serve greater pieces. Yeah.
And I would say with the technology, because Antonio, Neil, and I are all on the same page about this, but there's so much technology that's been created, services and products that would be so valuable of the community of people with disabilities and to people that care about somebody in the community of people with disabilities. And the numbers are staggering. I also am very excited about the future of work, those types of conversations, and about how I know that there's a real theme in the United States right now, not just the US, it's happening all over the world, developed countries, but also in developing countries, we're seeing some very interesting best practices. But with the future of work, allowing an employee to accommodate themselves without having to go to HR. For example, if I'm an individual and say that I hurt my back zealously, planting spring flowers the weekend, it would be so wonderful if I had the ability to just move from a sitting desk to a standing desk instead of having to go through the process of HR and blah, blah, blah. And making sure that you have, copies, licenses of screen readers or assistive technologies that not only help individuals with disabilities, but help all of us at the same time be more productive. I think tying these conversations about disability inclusion into the technology conversations, as Antonio was saying, and the future of work, I think that's what these networks can also do. Do you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, so the sharing of best practice across the piece. And as you see, I think technology is enabling us to notice different ways of doing things. Back in the day, you only got to look back, say, 10 years, and we talk about technology as not necessarily being the enabler because, disabled people working from home, it's still a segregational type approach.
Right.
But technology is making it easier for those people who used to have a physical presence in the office actually to take their foot off the gas pedal and to spend, much more flexible working and, a dynamic environment. And as they have less need to be in the office, so too we make it easier then for those that primarily want to be based at home to meet it. It's a leveling up. But,
right.
Yeah.
I would agree. I think that the rise of home working has made it much more normal for those that need it as an adjustment. So it's not seen as something special anymore. It's not seen as something where people are slacking off. The only downside I would say is obviously sometimes you need that kind of balance of human and physical interaction that you sometimes don't get from just doing the meetings on the phone or video conferences. Actually, videos are a lot better than disembodied voices. But yeah, I think it certainly has changed and made it easier for people to do jobs that they couldn't have done before, and particularly in the kind of jobs where you may have had meetings before and been required to be traveling into offices. Now the fact that you can screen share and share documents and collaborate remotely means that people do have the opportunities to do jobs that they possibly would have struggled to do before. So I think that technology is an enabler. There is an issue that we have, which is that new technology and the people inventing new technologies aren't necessarily thinking about being inclusive from the outset. That's not them necessarily being discriminatory. They're thinking about the thing that they've just invented. What we've got to do as a community is bring our voices to bear so that it is something that's at the top of everyone's mind when they're inventing a new technology, so that it's not unnatural to think about us as typical users. Because we're not atypical, we're part of a large minority of people. And actually, when you find that people have enabled and designed for accessibility and inclusiveness, generally speaking, people love the products because they're easy to use.
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. Spot on. Yes, I support your point. And also, linking it back to networks, the reason why we are seeing the growth in disabled employee networks and resource groups is because of enabling technology. Time we're developing what I would call quite a mature conversation across the world, where employee networks can get together, share their stories of difference, and build a very visible, very vibrant, very can-do, very imaginative, hopeful, unexpectant community. So yeah, it's great. It's great. I know you have to close. I could speak to you forever, but I won't.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you, Kate. It's been marvelous having you.
we've been excited about having you on the program.
Well,
Thank you so much.
equally excited. Thank you so much for the invite. I appreciate it.